Turpināsim īstenībā ar kiberdrošības tematu, bet jau ar tādu skatu punktu, kas izriet no globālas kompānijas redzes punkta. Tas būs mūsu nākamais temats. Jūs redzat arī ekrānā šobrīd runātāju un viņa prezentācijas nosaukumu. Tā kā izskatās, ka jūs esat gatavi klausīties un redzat sevi, ka esat šajā vietā un laikā tur, kur gribat būt. All right. It's time to welcome our next speaker, Džeimss Reinolds-Brauns from MANDIANT, Google Cloud. I actually introduced your topic already in Latvian language, so I hope we can kick off from here.
Perfect.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak. Yes, I'll be speaking in English. I'm sorry, my Latvian is non-existent, so I'll try and speak it slowly enough that I can make myself heard. I was really pleased to be invited to come and speak today. Just a little bit about myself. I'm part of the MANDIANT government consulting team, so we help governments and governmental organisations deal with the strategic approaches to cybersecurity. But MANDIANT's really two halves of an organisation. So there's the consulting side, like myself, where we also deal with incident response and preparation for cybersecurity problems. But there's also the intelligence side, who take all of the information we get about attacker behaviours and attacker threats and push that into products that we can use around the world and with governments and organisations around the place. I've been with MANDIANT for just over a year now, but prior to that I worked for the UK government for about 20 years, including doing 7 years doing cyber defence in NATO. So that's where I've come from, and it's really demonstrated to me the importance of working closely with allies, with partners, and with the private sector as well, with organisations around. And one of MANDIANT's sort of core reasons for being is to build a safer and more secure, more resilient cyber world, where we want to be the expertise, where we can come and help deal with the most impactful cyber attacks, where we're helping people deal with the routine stuff on their own and only coming in where we're absolutely needed. So when I was asked to present today, I really wanted to bring some of those lessons that we have from our incident response around the world, from our experience of supporting the Ukrainian government with their incident response, and think about what that means for building cyber resilience for organisations, for governments, and for the private sector. And of course, we can't really think about the cybersecurity risks without also thinking about the threats. And as it says at the bottom there, that's a line from NATO, cyber espionage and disruptive attacks continue to be the primary threat to NATO allies and European states. The Russian groups, in particular groups like Sandworm, will continue to represent a significant threat. They obviously present a huge threat in Ukraine, and we see them active there, targeting government, defence, diplomatic systems, critical infrastructure, and really hammering the critical infrastructure where kinetic attacks can also have an effect, but really working much more in lockstep now with the Russian military as they continue their war of aggression against Ukraine. But they're not just focused on Ukraine. They're not at all just focused there. We see them in support. We see them having a global scope, looking for key targets in political, military, private sector organisations around the world that align with Moscow's interests. We also see that these are some of the most capable actors in the world. They're highly adaptable. Where we've been supporting Ukrainian government entities, for instance, with incident response, with protecting their systems on a daily basis, we'll implement some changes to throw the actor out, and they'll be back the next day, having adapted their techniques, adapting their processes. So these are really highly capable actors, highly adaptive, where we see that being a real threat to organisations that don't have a similar response. And of course, there's other elements to the Russian threat. There's the pro-Russian hacktivist groups that employ DDoSes, defacements, disruption to try and discourage pro-Ukrainian sentiment around the alliance, around NATO, around Europe. And so these are motivated actors that are motivated by anti-West ideologies, and so they really try and undermine that support. And so NATO allies, in particular from Russia, will continue to be prime targets. But that doesn't mean just because Russia's on our doorstep, and on your doorstep in particular, but also the very real threat from Russia, doesn't mean that we can ignore others. China represents a scale and a size of threat that we can't really begin to comprehend. When I used to work in the British government, there was always a saying that if Russia is the hurricane that was trying to blow the roof off your house, then China is climate change that will bring fundamental alterations to our ecosystem. They used to be much less sophisticated than the Russian actors, but now we see them leveraging 0 days, having persistent access, and really having an enormous scale that we can't really see replicated anywhere else. Of course, there's Iran. Most of the time, that's a very regional focus, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But they attacked Albania in 2022 because of political considerations. So they've got a real incentive to bring disruption to European states where it aligns with their broader interests. And of course, DPRK were behind the WannaCry attacks, and we haven't seen the scale of those attacks again in Europe since then. But they continue to be very innovative as well. You know, we've recently revealed information about their use of AI and deepfakes to try and get jobs in Western IT firms, using generating deepfakes to try and pass interview processes, and that is all about raising revenue for that regime, and they're a disruptive regime that threatens security. And there's non-state actors. Now, we've recently published some information where we've highlighted the national security threat that we think non-state actors bring. They're the ones that present the most time that your defenders will be using up trying to protect themselves from. The exquisite threats from China and from Russia are very real, but they also pale in comparison to the scale of the cybercrime threat. So that is absolutely a problem. And there's also plenty of links there with states where they enjoy safe haven or potentially have direct links. The FBI and British police, for instance, recently released some information linking directly some of the cybercrime groups with the FSB. And so we see that information going out. So I'll just talk, that's about the threat picture as you see it. Mandiant have done some work and published some reporting available on the internet about our forecast for 2025. None of this will be a huge surprise, but I'll just cover some of the top topics. Obviously, for Russia, the Ukraine conflict will continue to be their main focus. Disruptive attacks, targeting soldiers at the front line, trying to build their situational awareness of the threat of the environment during the war. But outside of Ukraine, cyber espionage, pre-positioning for disruptive attacks would almost certainly continue to be their main focus. And pro-Russian information operations, like those that we saw during the Summer Olympics in 2024, will continue to be a factor. For China, they've invested heavily in equipping their cyber threat operators, and so that will continue to fuel an increase in the volume of activity from them. Again, we'll see them using stealthy tactics, using operational relay boxes, living on the edge of networks to try and exploit their vulnerabilities, but also, using 0 days and really having a very high-end capable operation there. Of course, they'll also have some information operations. It has less of an effect in Europe, but it'll again be at a scale and using things like AI-generated information to represent a threat. For Iran, obviously the Israel-Hamas conflict will continue to be the main driver, but they'll also target governments and communication systems outside of that, and also use that to try and generate support for their own military capabilities as well. So we see them trying to steal intellectual property, trying to get that information out. North Korea, as it says, really focusing on South Korea and the US in particular, as that's a very real threat for them, but then also using IT workers, AI-generated content, innovative sources to try and generate revenue, steal cryptocurrency, and so on and so forth. So really, that's what we expect to see in 2025. I'm sure that'll continue longer into the future as well. But really, what the threat is only one side of the coin. We also need to think about the risks that we have ourselves. So obviously, every government around the world is sees the benefits and the economic incentives for digitization, for connection. Companies using operational technology want to connect it to the internet because it brings capabilities and ease of use that that enables remote access. So there's a real drive to connect to the internet, but that means that there's more data about governments, more data about organisations, and more data about you available on the internet, which means that the impact of cyber attacks is ever greater. So IBM put the cost for an organisation of a data breach, the average cost of a data breach to an organisation at $4.8 million last year, and that will only go up as the scale and impact of cyber attacks increase. Cybercrime is, as I said, one of the biggest threats out there at the moment. And so really the disruptive attacks that we see against things like Colonial Pipeline or healthcare systems around the world will continue to have a huge impact on citizens, but also on the organisations that run them. So really knowing that that's now the biggest risk. Intellectual property theft from espionage is massive. As far back as 2009, we had companies some companies going bankrupt because espionage actors had stolen sufficient amounts of their intellectual property that they no longer had unique technologies on the market. And as recently as last week, the CEO of Anthropic, one of the new AI companies, has highlighted the risk of Chinese espionage against their AI algorithms, because if that information is available to other threat actors and becomes used by other companies, then that's probably a company-ending event for them. That is their sole, that is really the core of their intellectual property. And then there's IT and OT integration. We've seen, as I said, that drive to put OT on the network, and so we've things like Viasat at the beginning of the war were an example of the dependencies that we need to understand. But there's always OT risks out there, and that's a really hard problem to quantify. We were just working with a client government in Europe, where we showed them how from a simple laptop connected to the internet with no particular special accesses, we would be able to shut down some of the key substations in their national power distribution system, and within 2 minutes then write a script that could do that for every single substation around the country, all just from a laptop connected to an internet cafe. And if we can do that, then the adversary can do that. And so it really helps them understand their very real vulnerabilities. And of course, then there's the regulatory element. NIS2, everyone's aware of, GDPR for the citizen information. This is all, these are all drivers for change. So what can we do about it? How can we future-proof? And one of the Mandiant approaches is really based around 4 core pillars. As it says there, incident response, strategic readiness, technical assurance, and then cybersecurity transformation. And so incident response is about mastering the art of response. It's not just about knowing that you've got a security operations team that can be turned on at the drop of a hat. It's about having a well-rehearsed plan for incident response. It's having a structured plan, a structured process where you invest in skilled responders, you invest in the right technology. And you also then, when you've had those incidents, when you've had those attacks on your system, you go through a lessons learned process, which then helps feed and generate the security controls for the future. Proactive defense, strategic readiness is the next stage, and really that's about knowing that if all that you rely on is your reactive capability, then you'll always be on the back foot. You need to be taking the front foot in some of this. And so that's about understanding your threat intelligence and understanding the risks to your organisation, doing penetration testing, engaging in red teaming, testing your teams to see how good they are, making sure that their technology that they use is up to date and adaptive, and that where possible they've used automation to try and reduce that baseline workload for themselves. They don't want to be answering every single phishing email. You want to have some automation there that can really help. But also then investing in security awareness for the rest of your employees. You can have a world-class security operations center, but if the rest of your employees click willy-nilly on links or do whatever, or share passwords, use insecure systems, don't have multi-factor authentication, then really you need to build those systems too. Technical assurance is about control, controlling your systems, maintaining that secure environment. So really, again, focusing on some of the basics, and I was talking with some colleagues yesterday around how investing in those basics, investing in access management, patch management, configuration management, all hard slogs, but really necessary work, will stop almost every attack. It will certainly stop a lot of the cybercrime actors, because if you're that little bit more secure than your neighbour, when they come to attack you and find they can't get in, they'll just go somewhere else. That's different if it's Russia or China, certainly. But for the cybercrime actors, that biggest threat out there right now, they will stop if they can't get in quickly because they're motivated by money, and money for them is time. So really, it's about that. It's about those basics, multi-factor authentication. And then the final point really is about cybersecurity transformation. We recognise, and I've just described to you, that ever-changing threat landscape, understanding that picture of an adversary that doesn't stand still. So it's making sure that whatever you do, it's not just installed and left alone. It's not a drop and leave sort of system. It's about learning those lessons. It's about adapting your technology, adapting your processes, having a continuous learning approach. And it's a culture of security awareness, a culture of security within your organisation. And again, very hard to build. It's a long road, but it's a really important one, and that's one that we try and really impart to the organisations that we work with. And so there's sort of four main questions that you can try and answer for yourself to think about how ready you are, how resilient you are. Do you know where you're exposed? So this, as it says, identify your attack surface. You're both internal and external, and understand how exploitable you are. And your attack surface is not just your perimeter, not just your firewalls, not just your servers, but it's your internal assets, your applications, your services, the cloud resources, your employees. How are they exposed? How is your remote working system changing that? And it's also about identifying your crown jewels. What's really important? What are the things that you have the strictest controls around? And making sure that is understood within your business. The second question, know who's targeting you. Because once you know who's targeting you, then you can prioritise the security controls that you put in place to combat that. We did a survey recently where nearly 80% of the people who responded said they operate completely without any understanding of the risks that they face within their sector. So really understanding that threat intelligence picture will help you make decisions, effectively prioritise and action that intelligence. Because then you can know, for instance, the top sort of 5 or 10 techniques that an adversary will use to try and compromise your organisation, those adversaries that are most interested in your organisation, and then you can try and act against that. And again, that will just reduce your risk somewhat. Know if you're prepared. So that goes back to that proactive incident response plan that I mentioned just a second ago. Once you've identified your attack surface, once you know your adversary, then know if they're ready to be attacked by them. Are you testing your teams? Are they ready for that attack? And then finally, and this is something that we really reinforce with governments, know if you're being attacked right now. Every single organisation that we support in Ukraine, and there's over 40 of them that we've done over the 3 years, every time we've gone in and helped them with an incident response, the Russians have already been there, and they've been there for at least 2 years in some cases. So every single time we go to critical national infrastructure operators, governments, we go in and we say, how long have the Russians been on your environment? And they say, well, we haven't got any alerts, so we don't know that they're there. And we go in and we find them, and they're there, and they're stealthy, and they're clever, and they're good. So it's hard. But know if you're being attacked right now is really important, because any changes that you make, again, you could have a world-class system, but if they're already in your networks, if they're already in your organisation, then they'll stay there. And that's where automation can also help, because it really helps reduce that base load, leaving your human security analysts to try and focus just on those high-end cases. And so one of the things that Google does, and Google does this with our own networks and the billions of users and billions of applications that we have, is something called continuous detection, continuous response. And for us, it's not just a buzzword, it's about a fundamental shift in our approach to security. So this is about real-time data analysis, automation to proactively identify and mitigate some of the threats, an always-on security posture, because that's what automation can bring you, where you don't have to invest so much in human-scale efforts, but you're continuously monitoring your environments, going beyond just that signature-based detection and really looking at anomalies, behavioural analysis, to understand what's odd and what could be better. What could be better? And then once you've identified a risk, once you've identified a threat, because you will, then continuous response kicks in. It's that feedback loop with your security operations center, it's that feedback loop with your systems. So automating that containment and that location. And as I said, automation, AI-enabled tools is not about high-end capabilities being given over to computers. It's about removing the humdrum, removing the dross, removing that base load of tedious work that all of your analysts know how to deal with, and just letting them focus on the most interesting, the most challenging, most difficult cases. And as I said, this is something that we as Google do to protect all of our whole system. And then there's the maturity curve. No organisation with a low baseline of cyber maturity can go straight to the top in a few months. So this is really about understanding the long, hard road to an optimised system. And so developing cyber maturity requires that strong leadership and commitment from your organisation. It requires a comprehensive risk assessments, an understanding of the threat landscape, an understanding of your own assets. Thirdly, it demands that continuous training and awareness, so really building that capability. And so that will really deliver enhanced resilience, reduce risk, and improve business continuity for you. And what all this is just an example of some of the services that we provide to some of our clients that builds from understanding your risks, understanding what your current picture looks like, whether the attacker is already there. So the compromise assessment really tries to identify whether an attacker is already on your network, and then building the security team, building that strong security culture up to the point where you are able to operate in a highly effective manner. And so again, that client where I talked earlier, where we were helping them with their substation and their electricity network, they exhibited a hugely low level of maturity. They didn't even care about security. And so we went in there and demonstrated what we could do from a laptop. And all that was the first step for them on that security culture. So that they could then start implementing controls, physical controls as well, around some of those facilities that would enable security to be delivered for them. And so it wasn't to demonstrate what an adversary could do and walk away, but actually to try and help build that security culture for them. And so what does security transformation look like? And here, this is my last few points. This is really around building that culture for you, transforming yourself. Zero Trust was created by Google and focuses on the idea that nothing should be trusted, even when you're already inside the network. So it's strict identity management, strict controls that enables you to authenticate, but not rely solely on your perimeter controls. It really drives that security from within the network, because again, when the Chinese are operating on edge devices that look like they're part of your network, and they then can launch attacks into your own network, how do you control that when it's already part of the system? Again, security is AI-driven and automated, and I know Google have spent a lot of time and money on artificial intelligence and continue to do so. But on the security side, it really is a huge democratizer as much as anything. It helps malware analysts look at the different malware that they get fired at without having to be, 10-year-long experts. They can throw it into VirusTotal, or they can throw it into a tool which will break it down, and they can see what it will do on their network without having to have years and years of coding experience. It's about that proactive stance, knowing what to do when an incident happens, not just trying to figure it out on the fly, because that will always lead to problems, but having a plan, having a tested process, having exercises that will help your team build their capability. Building security in from an architecture. Again, I was talking with a colleague yesterday where they estimated that roughly 15% of every security program, of every new IT program, should be dedicated to security. Now that's obviously a fairly arbitrary figure in terms of what people might want to spend, but it's a long time since we can say, let's just put a firewall on the edge of it and that'll be our security controls. We need to build that in from the very beginning and build it in with all those strict management controls and so on and so forth. And authentication and APIs are there, that security controls are there, but they're invisible. They're enabling. Again, I like to draw an analogy here with lawyers. Often in organisations, especially in government, the lawyers are the ones who are there to say no. But actually, a good lawyer is somebody who will say, how can I enable this for you? And security is the same. For a very long time, security controls, all the passwords that you'd have to fill in, all the times you'd have to re-authenticate, were seen as hindrances, as controls that you don't want to have to deal with because they were just time-consuming. But security should be a way of enabling your operations. It shouldn't be a hindrance. It should be a way of enabling your operations to continue and to be free from threat, or as free from threat as you can be. So it's really about making that invisible, but strengthening your security and enabling your operations. So modern architecture with the controls baked in can make that happen. And that's where I'm going to leave you. So I'm really happy to answer questions. Thank you very much for having me. Mandiant don't have a huge presence in the Baltic region, but we're working more and more closely with governments and with organisations. Our main focus is on incident response, where we supported some of the biggest impacts that we see around the world, and we're really happy to try and impart that expertise where we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James. All right, I think we have some time for questions, indeed. So anybody? In this flank, maybe, because previously there were a lot of questions from there, not from here. Not sure why. Kāds jautājums varbūt droši varat arī? Jā, lūdzu. Pirmajā rindā, dāma.
Speaking of the future, is there anything businesses should be doing to proactively prepare for Q Day, or should they just rely on like government organizations and like Google and IT companies to solve these?
You mean quantum?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. There are things companies can be doing. A lot of it is about relying on government advice. And I read in the papers this morning that the UK National Cybersecurity Centre have published some guidance about how companies can prepare for post-quantum cryptography. And it is largely around just making sure that your security solutions are flexible and adaptable. Because if you've got very static systems that are rooted in the past, then they won't be available. Can't be upgraded. But there will be government advice. There will be European-wide advice, I'm sure. But it's about having that adaptable, flexible system in order to prepare, I think.
So it sounds like government organizations could be in a bit of trouble as well, then.
Absolutely. Government organisations known for their dynamism and flexibility. I'm sure that's different in Latvia, but certainly in the UK, they're not that flexible. They will be suffering the same problem. It's similar to Y2K, I suppose, in some ways.
Okay. Any more questions from the audience? I was thinking, this is like. It has always been the case. So you build a safe, somebody learns how to crack it, steals your money, and you kind of try to stay ahead of bad people, but usually it works vice versa. You actually fight with the consequences. What do you think about cybersecurity? Are we doomed for the same sort of cycle that we always are trying to catch up with innovative approach by bad people?
So yes, we are. We're always going to be learning from what we can. Facing new attacks, novel problems. But I think the cybersecurity, so the analogy of the safe is a really good one, except now we're in a situation where we have safe crackers on our team. We have people learning about the different safe attacks on safes around the world that can help us learn how to better protect our safes now. So that although, yes, a safe can be cracked tomorrow, actually we could put controls in today that will prevent that attacker getting there in the first place. So there is definitely analogies with the sort of physical security community, but it is also around learning how you can protect yourself now rather than worrying about what will happen tomorrow.
So on one hand, it is like cat and mouse, always this game, but then again, we can, preventively put traps,
exactly,
patrols and things like
exactly.
that. All right. What do you think governments can learn from companies? I think the question was already kind of addressed, but I was just curious because sometimes, at least in Latvia, some politicians, some people like it when they say a country should be governed like a company. It should be profitable. It should be, building wealth for its citizens and so forth. Can it be protected like a company, or it's just too complex?
With 20 years of public service, I don't wholly subscribe to the idea that governments should be run like companies, but I think there are lessons we can learn in terms of the ease with which companies decide to share information. One of the lessons that we talk to sometimes about our Ukraine experience is that whatever structures organisations, and whether that's private sector or public sector, have in place to share information and deal with cyber incidents now, almost certainly won't face the reality when a crisis hits, like in Ukraine. And absolutely, fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But we've got to prepare for the worst. And so, really understanding why you have those, controls, security controls, or need for paper-based exercise or whatever in place. So, do your processes face up to the reality of what cyber threats can bring? I think that's one of the lessons that governments can learn is you need to be able to operate at a scale and speed that private sector is doing already, but the governments need to deal with the cyber threat of tomorrow.
Right. All right. Any further questions from the audience, maybe? Not at the moment. Hopefully you would be still hanging around during the day. I think it's time to say official thanks for coming to the conference and make a photo as a proof.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you very much.
Ar jūsu aplausiem sakām Džeimsam paldies. Brīnišķīgi.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.